Hello, my name is Vicky Canales, and I was just thinking about the all-nighter I had to pull for my last essay and how it took me so long just to come up with a thesis and other paragraphs like the conclusion. I began to think about how difficult it was for me to enhance my evidence and my commentary. I even had to ask my teacher for a little motivation as I couldn't say what I really wanted to express in my paragraph. So I came to the overall thought of how this is such a reoccurring thing for me in all my essays. I began to ask myself, what do I want to add? What do I need to change? Does this even make sense? So it just made me realize how writing is a tricky process, especially when you're trying to get your point across effectively to your readers. There's this poem called On Writing by Adrienne Sue, and she's an author of 5 books of poems such as Peach State, Living Quarters, Having None of It, and Sanctuary, as well as Middle Kingdom. On Writing is a poem that dives into the struggles of putting thoughts into words and the doubts that come along within one's writing. A love poem, risk becoming a ruin, public, irretrievable, a form of tattooing, while loss, being permanent, can sustain 1,000 documents. Loss predominates in history, smorgasbord of death, betrayal, heresy, crime, contagion, deployment, divorce. A writer could remain aboard the ship of grief and thrive, never approaching the shores of rapture. What can be said about elation, that the elated, seeking consolation, from their joy will go to books for, it's wiser and quicker to look for. A poem in the dentist's chair, than in the luxury suite where eternal love declared turns out to be eternal. Who cares about a stranger's bliss? Thus the juncture where I'm stalled, unaccustomed to integrity, despite your presence, our tranquility, and every confidence. On Writing is a poem that reflects on what writing is like and the challenges that one encounters when doing so. Sue, the author, is known for writing about personal and cultural experiences. So, in this poem, she dives into the emotional struggles of writing. She does so in lines 1 and 2. She expresses a love poem, risk becoming a ruined, public, irretrievable, a form of tattooing. This points out how writing out your feelings or your thoughts may not come as easily to one. This is where self-doubt comes into play immediately in the poem as a way to maybe touch base with those writers who have faced frustration with writing and making it relatable for them. Sue manages to emphasize how writing captures more pain, grief, and loss. This implies that this is what is more powerful in writing compared to joyful and happy topics that other authors may choose to write about. Sue utilizes metaphor when she comments in lines 9 to 10, the ship of grief and thrive, never approaching the shores of rapture. This shows how the words ship and shores adds layers to this meaning behind the metaphor. Therefore, this metaphor is inferring that writing goes through loss and grief, not being able to fully grasp that happiness. So, this can mean that writers can express themselves deeply with their struggles, but not so much with joy and contentment, which is what Sue expresses throughout the poem. Furthermore, she uses contrast in lines 15 to 16, a poem in the dentist's chair than in the luxury suite. The contrast here is that there is a discomfort in the dentist's chair while there is peace in the luxury suite. This can represent struggle as well as peace, and Sue implies how writing is more in the dentist's chair, causing that discomfort, and this overall creates an understanding to the audience that this is what people write about and helps them feel more motivated in their writing. Adrienne Sue uses structure in her poem to strengthen her overall idea of writing. That is, that writing thrives more on struggle than joy, as mentioned before. The poem's overall flow leads up to personal reflections, which she is known for in her work. On Writing is a free verse poem, giving it that flowy feel to it. The stanzas are broken up into couplets, and that could be for numerous reasons. I believe it's partly because Sue wants the readers to read, interpret, and reflect, allowing a pause each stanza. So bringing back the devices into play, Sue utilizes contrast to point out the tension between struggle and joy in writing, yet she also uses metaphor to show the complexity within the writing process. Sue's theme dives into the perseverance needed for writing and the complexities that are involved in expressing one's feelings. However, she implies that these difficulties are what makes you a better writer, and it just creates room for growth. She also expresses how writing is more based on struggle, but it still allows one to let out their emotions and frustrations through the work of writing, which can make it more meaningful not only for the author but for certain readers that can relate as well. So people can share their own stories and experiences in whatever manner they would like. Sue effectively shows that these conflicts aren't always easy to work through, but it creates meaningful work in writing, which is kind of like the theme throughout the poem. I believe this poem is not so much about giving hope to the readers, but more about just allowing them to relate and know that they're not the only ones. I think the words and structure of this poem helps the audience realize in a deeper sense how writing brings people together emotionally, again allowing those to share their experiences and own matters to the world. I think it can give the readers comfort, and I chose this poem myself because it allows me to relate, as writing sometimes can be very complicated for me, as I usually know what is on my mind, but sometimes can't efficiently convey that in my writing. Therefore, Adrienne Sue's poem on writing encourages the readers to embrace their difficulties within their own writing journey. A love poem risks becoming a ruin. Public, irretrievable, a form of tattooing. While laws being permanent can sustain 1,000 documents. Loss predominates in history. Smorgasbord of death, betrayal, heresy, crime, contagion, deployment, divorce. A writer could remain aboard the ship of grief and thrive, never approaching the shores of rapture. What can be said about elation, that the elated seeking consolation from their joy will go to books for it's wiser and quicker to look for a poem in the dentist's chair than in the luxury suite where eternal love declared turns out to be eternal. Who cares about a stranger's bliss? Thus the juncture where I'm stalled, unaccustomed to integrity, despite your presence, our tranquility, and every confidence. This podcast is being produced in my home in Maryland, in which I acknowledge the lands of the ancestral territory that is the Piscataway and Susquehannock people.